All right, so briefly, just to introduce myself, my name is David Shaw. Most of you already obviously know that. But I'm a professional photographer. My background, though, is in wildlife biology. I have both master's and undergrad degrees in wildlife, and I made my living as a professional biologist for quite a few years before switching over about 12 years ago to being a full-time writer and photographer. And most of you, I think, probably learned about this through Facebook or perhaps my mailing list. So I just want to say thanks to all of you for joining in. I know this is a really uncertain time in all of our lives, and I know that feels that way to me. So I hope you're staying safe and staying healthy and enjoying some good quality time at home. All right, so as long as everybody can hear me, and if you can't, put something in the chat and let me know, we will dive here into Lightroom. So let me bring that up. All right, so this is Lightroom, and I kind of thought the way I would structure today's talk would be to more or less introduce you to the program. We won't be able to cover everything because it's big. Somebody asked about the difference between Lightroom and Photoshop, and so they're both Adobe programs. But Photoshop was, when it was originally designed, was designed as a graphics design program. And that graphics design program isn't always the best for photography specifically. It's just too big. Anybody who's dived into Photoshop probably understands that feeling. There is a lot of stuff. It's designed for a lot of text and graphics and digital art and that kind of thing, but not so much for simple manipulations of images. So in response to that, Adobe created Lightroom. And Lightroom is designed specifically for photographers, and that's why it's really powerful and useful for us. It is a pretty simple program, all things considered. It's straightforward. It has two main purposes. The first purpose is to create a library of your images. It's a great resource, and it's extremely powerful in terms of organizing, sorting, naming, all that kind of stuff. And we'll go into that here in just a minute. And then secondarily is to optimize your image, to develop them, to give you an idea of how things are, to give you the power to manipulate your images for the better, optimize them for viewing, and that is equally powerful, probably even more so, than its ability to sort and monitor. So these images I have up here just happens to be where I am in my catalog. Just some photos from Africa. And you can see I've got different colors applied. Some images you might see some different stars at the bottom that give me a chance to rate things. This is all of my images. If you look over here on the left, you will see, I'm going to minimize you guys, get you out of the way. If you look up here, let's start actually here at the top of the screen. So you'll see library, develop, map, book, slideshow, etc. across the top here. The two things, there's three I use with any regularity. Library right here, develop, and then the last is print. The ones in between, I can't think of any time I've ever actually used those. They're pretty specific to certain projects, and there's other ways that are equally good at dealing with them. So the two we're going to be concerned with for us today are library and develop. All right, you'll forgive me 1 second. I'm going to just make sure there's nobody in the waiting room. If they come in more than 10 minutes late, they are out of luck. Nope, nobody's waiting. All right, so back to this. Okay, so here on the left is the catalog. So this is all of my images. So I have 15 years worth of digital photos integrated into my Lightroom catalog. There are 80,245 images in this catalog. Some users prefer to have multiple catalogs for different projects or trips or all that kind of stuff. I find that gets cumbersome. Lightroom is extremely good at keeping file sizes small and usable when you're looking at just a library. So what Lightroom does is it takes an image and it points. So if I highlight this image as this image of two juvenile wild dogs in Botswana, that's here in the center, the image is not actually here in Lightroom. It is pointing to that image, which lives on an external hard drive. And so even though I have 80,000 images at an average of 15 or 20 megabytes an image, all of those images can safely live off my main computer hard drive. And it makes it extremely easy, low volume, so you can have hundreds of thousands of images in a Lightroom catalog and still not lose any performance. Below that, you'll see folders. That's a general structure of where your images are found. So if this is going to point to my external hard drive, I never really mess with that, so no need to deal with it here. But the last one that we will talk about here is collections. And that's a way to sort out images into small groups. So if you have a particular slideshow or project, or you're putting together a show for your photo club, you can drop images that you might want to into that. And we'll do that here in a minute. On the right-hand side here of the library module, you have the histogram of the image selected. So that just shows you the distribution of light. That's a separate subject. If you don't know what histograms are, it's a useful tool for photography, but it's kind of outside the scope of this talk. And then there's a few tools for quick developing an image if you want to. I never use that. Keywording images, creating your keyword lists, and then the metadata of all the images that of all of the data from the image you created. So, this is the name of the image, the date it was created, the camera I made it with, etc. Down the line. So to kind of teach us along our way, I thought I would just bring up, we'll just do it. So I've got a SD card that I just pulled out of my camera, and I'm going to stick it into the card reader. Usually, yep, and it did, Lightroom will just automatically pick up that there is a new file to come in. So there's little zoom control bars are kind of annoying here. Getting in the way. There it goes. Okay, so these are the images that are on there. There's nothing particularly exciting. It's just what I had on my camera here recently. And so these are images that are not yet put into Lightroom. But this is a place that it gives you your first ability to sort through your photos. And so for those of you who watched my 5 Minutes of Photography YouTube show a few days ago, these are some of the blur images that I created as part of that. Here's a couple of some images of coyotes walking across the field behind my parents' home. And, just some, bad shots of birds flying by that I was mostly using to identify distant swallows, and are not photos that I'm ever going to use for anything. And a few images of Cooper's hawks that I made just yesterday here at the house. So if there's things that you look at and you know right away that you're not going to use those, you can either just go through and manually unclick them by selecting that click at the top. Or if you know there's just a couple in the collection that you're going to want to keep, you can just go down here to the bottom and click uncheck all. And that's what I'm going to do for now. Uh-oh, my drive just ejected, but that's okay. And so I'm just going to go through here, and I'm going to grab a few images. So I'm just going to say I want to take all these pictures of coyotes, maybe not the ones where he's turned away from me. So I'm just going to shift click, grab a whole bunch of them, and click that little box in the corner. So I want to look at those. Oh, I don't know. Let's see. I'll take this cute little bunny. Maybe both of those shots, and there's one here. And here's some pictures of Cooper's hawks. So why don't I? I'll just grab a few of these Cooper's hawks shots as well. All right. So we've done sort of an initial edit. That's really straightforward. You can do that after the fact too. But we'll do it this way here. I'm going to see if I can get my drive back. It looks like it disconnected on me. Let's see if I can get that back. All right, so I store most of my images, as I mentioned, on an external hard drive, and hopefully that was where those images that I just hit. I'm going to hit import. And they will start to pop up as they are imported into my catalog, supposedly. I think my hard drive's because it got... Wow! Sorry, folks, I'm having a little technical difficulties here. There we go. Hopefully everybody can still see that. Everybody give me a thumbs up if you can still see my Lightroom screen. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, yeah, so there come the photos in. And it popped up briefly saying card ejected after import. So I can take that safely out of my computer and I'm done with it. So now I have all of these images that have just come in. And one of the great features of Lightroom is the ability to do fairly quick edits to say, okay, looking at all those pictures of the coyote along the top of my image, my frame here, I'm not going to need all of those. There's probably one of those or two maybe that I'm going to want to keep. So what I can do to do a quick check is go down here to the bottom of the screen. You can either double click. So if you double click, it'll pop up to a full frame image. Or you can go down to the bottom and click right on that. See that square within the rectangle within the rectangle. Either way, it will give you a full frame screen. Now, I can look at this right away, and I can tell that's not a sharp image. So that's not something I'm going to want to keep. And so what I will do is Lightroom allows you the opportunity to color code. Rather than delete it right away, my choice is usually to flag it. So I just pressed the number 6, which flagged it as red. So that'll be an image that likely gets deleted. But I'm not going to delete quite yet. Then using the right and left arrow keys, I'm going to go through. That's a pretty decent shot. I'll hold on to that for a minute. So I'm going to flag that guy 9, which is blue. So everybody's different. I like to use the color codes. So I will use red for an image that's likely to be deleted, blue for an image that I want to keep for the time being. It might get deleted later, but I'll keep it for the time being. It's an unprocessed image. And then I use green to tag an image that's ready to go. It's ready to be printed. It's been processed and dealt with. So we'll scroll through that. 46 images converted to DNG. I meant to talk about that. I'll come back to that. So let's just kind of go through the rest of these coyote photos. I'll just give them a quick tag. So we'll keep that one as blue. I don't really like that expression. We'll get rid of that guy. I don't like that one. That was a little soft. Eyes are closed. Not a bad posture. We'll put that guy blue. A little soft maybe. That's pretty good. And I don't like that look. That's too good. Turning it the wrong way. Okay. So now let's go back to the main view. And you can see all of the images that I've tagged as blue are images that I probably want to keep. The ones that are red are ones that I'm probably going to get rid of and I don't need to deal with right now. I meant to talk about importing. I know there were some questions about raw photos, so you'll pardon me, I'm going to drop back to our import screen. And we're going to briefly mention this. So at the top of the screen here, so here's those images. Every camera manufacturer has got a different raw format. So if you guys are shooting in, that's something I also wanted to mention briefly. How you've got your camera collecting your images is pretty important. And so if you're going to use Lightroom and you guys are advanced enough to want to use this, I would suggest that you use raw format settings in your cameras. It gives you a lot more latitude in your post-processing. If you're shooting in JPEG, you can still use Lightroom, but you're not going to get as much out of it. But if you're going to learn how to use Lightroom, I strongly suggest you capture your images in RAW. You might want to do RAW and JPEG if that's in your workflow, and then you can share JPEGs that look pretty good right away. I shoot just in RAW. Everything I take gets some sort of manipulation here in Lightroom. Okay, well, what I wanted to talk about here somebody else drop into the meeting. Is these, so these are made with an Olympus camera. You can see the code is ORF. Because every camera manufacturer has their own raw formatting, I prefer to use Adobe's formatting, which is DNG. So the digital negative file is Adobe's proprietary raw format. And it just allows, you just know if you're using DNG that your images are going to have the most latitude and flexibility while using Lightroom or Photoshop for that matter, but Lightroom in particular. So, okay, that was what I wanted to say about DNG. I recommend using DNG you can see my images as they come in. They're coming from the card from the camera, and they're being dropped into my external hard drive. And I have that set as copy as DNG. And that transfers everything from Olympus's or Lumix's or Canon's or whatever camera I'm using into Adobe's digital negative raw format. Okay. So that brings us back to here. All right, so I've highlighted those images, and I can do that quickly through the rest of them. So, I could race through these, for the sake of brevity. I'll do this pretty quickly. Don't much care for that one. Oh, I'm getting a bird taking a poop, so that's not really a shot I need to have. So I'm scrolling through these really quickly, flagging them as red. There's kind of a nice aggressive posture. I like that, so we'll give that a blue label. But the rest of these, it's not turning the wrong way. This is the chance for you to look at your images, be aggressive, say, I don't need to keep these. What am I ever going to use those for? Little red-winged blackbird from yesterday morning. It's okay. I'll probably keep one of those. And then a couple of a portrait of a Cooper's hawk. A lot of similar images. You really only need to keep one, so that's maybe not the best. It's not too bad. There he's got his nictitating membrane half closed, so I definitely don't want that one. He's looking a little bit the wrong way. Kind of a nice aggressive look. I'll probably keep that one. And then I'll keep that one too. So, very quickly there, we raced through and tagged all of the images in that series. I've got better images of bunnies, so we're not going to keep any of those. And you can see that we very quickly flagged all those out as red. And so what Lightroom will allow you to do then is say, okay, I'm confident I don't want to delete these. If you're going through some really important images, like in the fall, I was in Africa. I shot like 15,000 images while I was in Africa. I knew I wasn't going to keep the vast majority of those, but I didn't really want to delete them right away either. And so I flagged them as red, and then I sat on them for about a week before I finally had the guts to say, all right, they're gone. And so I did this. After I decided they were gone for good, I go up, and up here in this top part of Lightroom, you can see text, attribute, metadata are none. And what you can do is click on attribute, and then it will grab all of the red images. So everything that's red in my collection that is flagged for deletion, and I'm sure I want to get rid of, I can go up, select them all by shift clicking, and then hitting that delete key. And it gives you a chance to back out in case you did it accidentally. And it also gives you two options. You can either delete from disk, which clears them right off of your hard drive space, or it just removes them from Lightroom. So with these images, I know I'm never going to need them again. I have no desire to keep them around occupying hard drive space. So I'm just going to click delete from disk, and they're gone. That leaves me with these blue images left. And I am going to make one change here because I'm going to do something. I'm going to flag this guy as, and that was a right click, by the way, if you're curious about how I did that. I'm going to flag that guy as purple because we're going to come back to that image later, and I want to make it easy to get to. All right, and so the last thing we can do here is rename them. So default names out of your camera, this is a worthless name. It's meaningless. You can see right over here on the right where my mouse is, it says file name, p4180034.dng. Okay, that does nothing for me. What I want to know about that image is what's in it, where did I take it, maybe when did I take it. And so you can do quick renamings in Lightroom. I'm going to grab just the images of the coyote because they're going to have separate names from the Cooper's hawks and the red-winged blackbird. And then I'm going to go up here to library and click rename photos. So I shift clicked and got all of the images I wanted to rename. And then I clicked on rename. And then it gives you the chance to do a custom text. So whatever works for you, you're welcome to steal my particular naming scheme, but this is how I do it. So I give it a location. I'm in Colorado right now, sadly away from my home in Alaska. And then maybe a little more specific, I'm in the Denver suburbs. So I'm just going to hit Denver, and I'm going to say what's in it. It's a coyote. And then I give my dates a code. I have found selling stock images over the years that some buyers, actually the date matters when you capture it. So I don't want it to be obvious in the name of the image what date it was captured at. So I do a kind of easy to interpret code. This is the year 2020, so I'm going to start it off with 2. And these images, you can look to see the date the image was created right over here on the right side. So this image was made on April 18th. So I'm going to do it as 1804 and the second half of 2020. So, I clearly know that that was 2020 on the 18th of April, but somebody just looking at it might just infer that that's a random number. And then it gives you a start number, and every image in that series will get a unique number at the end. All right, so there we go. That changes those 3 images' names. They are now called Colorado, Denver, Coyote, the date code, and number 2. I like having some keywords in with my images, and we're going to do the same thing here with these guys. We're going to rename the Cooper's Hawks images. Quickly going through. It gives you, it default comes back up with the name you just gave it. So I'm just going to change this to the birder code Cooper's Hawk, COHA, and that will know I can look those images up later. And the last image of the red-winged blackbird, rename as red-winged blackbird, RWBB. And very quickly, all of those images were done. And you can do hundreds of images that way. Across the board, you can rename your images. I like to do some keywords within my file names because it allows me to find those images much more easily later. Now, I'm jumping back into my main image catalog here, and you can see those images right here in blue that we just imported, along with a few images from previous shoots. And lost my train of thought. So, keywords. So the other thing we can do if we want to make these easier to find is there's actual keywords. So you can add these manually. You can add them in batches. Honestly, it's a little more advanced than. In fact, I don't even really use keywords very often anymore because I use keywords in my naming scheme. But if you did want to add, if you're going to put images up on a stock site, I would want people to know that this is in Colorado. I would want people to know that this is, a red-winged blackbird. You can add in whatever other keywords you might want to have as part of that images that will stay with that image forever. But in terms of my naming scheme, I just do a few, and that allows me to chase down most images I want. So going up here, all 80,000 of my images, you can see over here on the left side, are being searched right now. So let's say I get a request for somebody who wants to see every image I've ever made of a lion in Botswana. So I'm going to enter Botswana, lion. And all of my images of lions from Botswana will appear. And those are all being drawn from my naming scheme. Since I'm not good at keywording, that allows me to chase down those specific images that I might be interested in. And actually it looks like I'm missing a few. So some of mine have not been properly keyworded or not properly named. So that also lets me know that I need to go back and double check some places that I need to look for errors in my naming schemes. So you can just see that gives you a powerful ability to sort. So with 80,000 images in my collection, though, how do I do something a little, I don't need to see those all the time. And so what I can do is over here in the collections. So these are the collections. So these are all ones I've created for different projects, here's one I was creating a few years ago looking to create a new portfolio of online images. Here's images that I was printing for my mom at one point. And so you can see how the different images have come together. Now, let's say I want to do a set of images conveniently just for this class. So I'm going to go here. Actually, let me go back up to all photographs. and then I'm going to create a new collection right here. So with the plus sign, create collection, a pop-up will come up, and I'm going to call this Lightroom demo. All right, one image, whatever image was already highlighted, popped up as part of that collection. I don't need that image in this collection. As long as I am in the collection here is highlighted, and the image is highlighted, I can hit delete. And a pop-up will come up warning me, but it says that the image is going to be deleted from the collection, but not off of all of my images. So I didn't lose the image out of my main collection. It just removed it. It didn't remove it out of my catalog. It just removed it out of that collection. Oops. So I flagged a few for our next part of our talk earlier in a color I don't use very often, which is purple. So I pulled out 5 images, 6 images, and let's just say I pulled these out of my catalog. I'm going to highlight all those, and let's go down here to our Lightroom demo right here, and I'm just going to click and drag these. Oops. Didn't get them all. Hang on. There we go. And I'm going to put those in our Lightroom demo. All 6 of those images have now appeared in there, and now I can get to them. So if you have a slideshow or you're doing a demo for your photo club, or you're giving a talk, or you're printing a book, or you just want to pull out some of your favorite macros, your favorite landscapes, your favorite wildlife, you can put those into a file over here, and allows you to sort them pretty quickly and pretty easily. Yeah, so that's the long and short of how to deal with those kinds of things. All right, I'm going to go back here. And let's open up the floor to questions. I'm going to unmute all of you guys, so watch out for feedback. But feel free to jump in with any questions that you might have, and then I'll try to talk about them. So I'm going to unmute all, and we'll take it from there. All right, so anybody have questions about the library module that I can answer fairly quickly, bearing in mind we still got some stuff to cover?
I had a question if there's any data loss in the translation from RAW to DNG.
No, there isn't. In fact, DNG is probably even a bit better that way, and Adobe's done a very good job of translating that info into DNG so that it's completely lossless, and you end up with a file type that's way easier to use than the original RAW format.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else have questions they wanted to touch on quick?
David, this is Fletcher.
Hey, Fletcher.
Hey, so make sure I got this right. So you have on a hard drive, you have all 8,000 files.
Yep.
Okay. And so when you move into the collection, right? Where are the files in the collection? Still on the hard drive?
So yeah, all the images, the actual images, the original file lives on the hard drive. It never comes into the Adobe catalog. The catalog just documents changes that you've made to the image, and it documents where that image is located. And so when you export an image or whatever, it applies those changes into whatever file type you've added, and that creates it. So it never, you don't, my Lightroom catalog is like 2 gigabytes, but I've got terabytes worth of images. And so the Lightroom catalog simply points to where the images are stored. Is that clear?
When you're working the images and do all the changes to the image, if you export them, you're exporting them to another, your phase series are going where?
So the changes are only stored within Lightroom. And so it doesn't change the original file at all. It's completely lossless. So the original file that lives on my external hard drive, that's the same file it's always been. It never changes. It only changes within the Lightroom program.
So after you've done developing, now you're going to export, where do you export to?
Export to another hard drive, export to my desktop. It depends on the file and how big the file is, where I want it to go. So you can put it wherever you want.
Okay. I don't understand that because I was totally confused with what the catalog is.
Yeah.
So you have
And feel free to touch base with me later, like Fletcher, if you have more particular questions about that too. All right, so I'm just gonna scroll down through the questions here. I got, let's see, action delete cards and yet. Okay, so does the when I'm done crossing, Joe asked whether or not the images were deleted from the SD card, and the answer, Joe, is no. They stay on there. You have to either select to delete them or format them later when you put it in your camera if you want to delete the card. Otherwise, it stays as a secondary backup. Ever apply developed settings on import? Kelly, no, I don't. I don't ever apply. All of the developed stuff I do is within the develop module of Lightroom. I don't do anything on import other than get the file in. How's the label get applied? So you can either, Jennifer, that's a shortcut. You can use shortcut 6, 7, 8, and 9 are different colors. And you can also do that by right-clicking and selecting color label. What is the loss in translation from Nikon RAW to DNG? The answer to that question, Joe. Can you make a file DNG after it's imported? Yes, you can. Leslie, that is a good question. Once it's in your computer, into Lightroom, you can indeed make all those changes. And you purchase the program or do monthly auto updates. I am part of Adobe's Creative Cloud program. For like $100 and something bucks a year, you get both Photoshop and Lightroom, and that gives you all of the updates. And so that's really the best way to go. The external hard drive, Becky, I use is I think this is a Seagate, but all of my external hard drives are duplicates, so I have multiple copies of everything. Renaming the photos, there's no shortcut, Jennifer. That's just kind of the, you use that. There probably is a shortcut actually, but I don't. I just go up to the menu and hit library and say rename photos. What platform do I use? What are you referring to there, Fred? Oh yes, I'm using an Apple. All of my stuff is done in Mac, but it's pretty much the same interface, and no matter what kind of program you use. All right, so I don't want to skip too quickly over this, but we do have a lot to cover in the next section. If we do a secondary talk on this, we can go into more detail as we go into this. So we can talk more about organization, and we can talk more about that, more about this. So I just want this to be an introductory talk, so you'll have to pardon me if I'm sort of skipping along to more. To different things and over more quickly than you guys would want. There's a lot to cover, and so I think maybe we'll have to do this in multiple classes if people are interested. All right, I'm going to mute you guys all again, and we will move on. All right. Okay, so here we are back in Lightroom. Jennifer, just to answer that question you had about renaming, you go to the top of your menus here in Lightroom, library, one of them, and rename photo is right there. It does have a shortcut, it's F2. I don't recall ever using that. But that's how you rename your photos. Okay, so now we're going to move into the development. And those images that I pulled out earlier for our little Lightroom demo, these 6 guys, this one in order. Let's grab this shot. This is from Resurrection Bay outside of Seward, Alaska last summer. That's the image that's highlighted. You see it's gray as opposed to purple like the rest of it. And I just click on Develop. And this screen will pop up. Now, another brief note about organizing your screen here. You see these little arrows on the left? You can close or expand, collapse or expand both sides of the image. So you can get a maximized image size, or you can get access to all the tools. Since I work primarily on a laptop and I actually like to have these visible, I'll occasionally close the left-hand side, but in the develop module, I always have everything open here on the right side. So you can see it has some similarities to the library module, the histograms here at the top. But we're just going to do a quick sort of first pass edit on a couple of these images so you can see the capabilities. So here's our histogram. You can see by that little, see on this triangle here in the upper right, you can see how that's flagged. If I hover over that, in the center, right in the center of the sun, there, you'll see that turns red. And that's because that is an area that's pure white. It means it's been blown out completely. But it's the sun, so that's fine. There is nothing highlighted here. You can see that triangle is white. This triangle has no color. So there is no loss in the blacks. So everything I've got on the dark side of the image is there, and I've only blown out the tip of the sun there. So I know this image is pretty well exposed. Okay, here in Lightroom, this top section right here is some specific tools, and we'll dive into a couple of those later. But just for a quick overview, the rectangle with the dotted rectangle is crop. This is the clone tool. That's a red eye brush. I've never used it. This is a variable filter tool. I can't remember what Lightroom calls it. Graduated filter is what they call it. And we might talk about that one later. That's a circular filter tool, and this is a brush. The ones I used most are crop, occasionally the clone tool, the graduated filter tool, and the brush. Those are the ones I use most. Next up, we have the basic module, and this is where I start. In here, you can do a number of things. You can convert to black and white with one click if you want to see what a black and white image looks like. You can move back and forth between those. You can adjust your white balance. So one of the great advantages of shooting in RAW is you don't have to worry about white balance in the field unless you want to, because you can adjust it here. So if I want to, make it much bluer or cool tones, I can do that here. If I want to make warm tones, I can do that here. And you can really manipulate, your overall color tones just by sliding the slider back. If you take it someplace and you don't like it and you want to get back to where you were, you just double click. Nope. Oh, if I can double click, there we go. And that'll take me back to whatever it was as captured. I kind of liked it a little bit warmer, so maybe we'll take it and just warm up that image just a little bit. Exposure is, as you would expect, it's the exposure. It changes the bulk of the histogram to the right and left. And so I can really brighten the image a lot, or I can darken the image a lot, depending on what you think needs to be done by moving the slider around. I think I'm going to go, for this image, actually, you know what? I'm not going to touch it at all. Contrast increases the brightness of the bright areas and the darkness of the dark areas. I don't really use it a lot until later. So I skip over contrast for the time being, and that's what I'll do here. Highlights, I don't know if you guys are noticing this, but as I scroll over, so if you look up here at the histogram, and you can see when I'm on the highlight slider, there's that right part right here is gets highlighted in the histogram. And there's actually two ways to control the slider. You can control it here by physically sliding it back and forth, or you can go up here and slide back and forth using your mouse. So you can just click on it in that area up there and scroll back and forth, and you can make the change. I tend to use the sliders just because that's what I'm used to. But either way, we'll get the job done. I think the highlights are probably a little too bright, so let's just bring those down a touch. Shadows, I don't know about this image. So when I come into an image, I tend to like to have an idea of what I'm going to do with it. I haven't given this image a lot of thought yet, and so I probably want those mountains, which I suspect are the darker areas of my image, a little darker. So I'm going to bring the shadows down and darken those mountains a little bit. The blacks will do that too. Whites, the only thing that's pure white in this image is the sun. I can pull that out and really blow out that center part of the frame, or I can pull it down and do as little whites as I can. I think what it was shot at is fine. And then blacks, I can bring that down a little bit, increasing the contrast between the blacks and the rest. So let me try to come in here. Wait. All right. So that was kind of a first pass on colors. I'm not completely happy with where we are. But one thing I noticed is there's too much sky, and there's maybe a little bit too much water. I think this image would probably be better off as a slight panoramic composition. So I'm going to go back up here to the crop tool. And in the crop tool, when you click on that, it's crop and straighten. So if my horizon were off, I could take this angle tool right here, click on that, and go to the flat horizon and draw a line across. And it will correct that. You can see it was just ever so slightly off. The image just tilted just a tick. And then once you get it where you like it, you can double click and it'll accept that crop. I'm going to go back to that because I also want to remove some of the sky. Now, this little lock over here is one of these things that'll drive you nuts if you forget to either lock or unlock it. So if I have original selected and it's locked, it will keep the same aspect ratio as the original, just cropping out the edges. That's not what I want in this image. So I'm going to unlock the lock, and I'm going to take off some of that sky, and I'm going to take out some of that water. And I like that crop a lot better. You know, I might tidy it up again later, but that's a good place to start. Now, moving down to this next section of the basic module here, you have presence. Presence is 3 different things that do slightly different but kind of similar things. Texture, to be honest, this is a new feature in the latest version of Lightroom. It adds apparent sharpness. So if you have, say, animal fur, it will make the animal fur appear much more distinct. You can see on this image, look at the clouds in the central part of the image that are over the mountains. As I slide it to the right, you'll see those clouds get more. I'm just going to do it a couple of times so you can see the changes. You'll see them get more and more distinct. It's not a huge change in this particular image. I'll leave a little bit of it. Clarity increases the contrast where dark areas meet light areas. And so it improves the apparent sharpness, not the actual sharpness, but the apparent sharpness of an image. And I like clarity. I think it can be a nice tool. Watch as I slide this up. You know, I'll take it all the way down from low clarity, makes it look like my lens was fogged over. And as I slide it up, you can see the mountains darken a little bit, the sky, particularly around the edges, brighten a little bit, and you end up with a pretty different look. I like clarity. In this image, it can handle a lot. Some images start to look weird if you put too much, and we'll see that here. Dehaze, I had a client on a workshop once tell me that the dehaze was known as the hammer. And I think that's a pretty good description because as the dehaze, it really does have a huge impact. You can see it if you take it all the way over the right, it gets kind of crazy looking. But a small little hit of dehaze can sometimes be useful, and it really does an effective job if you do have some fog that you want to kind of get rid of a little bit. It can really help a hazy image look less hazy. All right, and Vibrance, so those are the 3 presence ones. Vibrance increases the saturation of the middle saturation tones. So if you have something kind of like this blue, that's not particularly bright blue, but it's blue. Increasing the vibrance will make that more of a pop. So I'm going to slide that up to the right, and you can see the yellows and the blues really start to come out as you take it up. If you go too far, it starts to look pretty funky. So I don't tend to use either vibrance or saturation a lot. Vibrance a little bit. Saturation is a global change. It covers everything in the image. So it will make every color more saturated if you add it to the right. I tend not to use saturation very much at all, except on specific images. So I'm sliding that to the right. You can see it starts to look pretty fakey there at the edge. But, you know, a little bit of color, you know, kind of makes that orangey tones, that kind of sunrise light there in the middle pop more. And that's more than I would normally apply it. Plus 27, that's a lot. But as a first pass, I don't think that's a bad thing. So I'm skipping over some here because honestly, those are outside the scope of an introduction to Lightroom class, so we're going to skip those. But we're going to move down here to detail. And this is where we can sharpen. So if you zoom in, either by clicking up here in the top left in the navigator, or simply just clicking on the image where you want it to go, you can zoom in and see the texture. So sharpening will do just that. It'll sharpen the image. Notably, Lightroom is not as good as Photoshop at these particular tools. It's not as good at sharpening, and it's not as good as noise reduction, but it does do a little bit. The default I have it set at is plus 25. Honestly, that's usually enough for me. If the image is sharp out of camera, that's usually fine. Noise reduction is, you can see, particularly down here, I've got the zoomed in at 2:1, so it's pretty far zoomed in. You can see a little bit of noise, particularly in these dark areas. So I'm going to give just a touch of noise reduction. And you can see that that noise pretty much disappeared. It also softened the edges more than I wanted, so I'm going to pull that back. And there we go. And then the last thing that I wanted, two more things I wanted to mention, is lens corrections. Adobe's got in their collection of lenses, it has got, there are hundreds of different lenses that are set within Adobe, and you can just click the profile. It'll remove chromatic aberrations, and it will remove known issues with the lenses. So if there's a particular lens that has, it causes a bad fisheye effect that's unwanted, or it has chromatic aberration that is a known quantity of that lens and quantifiable, Adobe will have entered that in here, and you can just click those, and it'll correct those issues. So I usually do that. You can also manually enter that, or manually change things, the vignettings caused by lenses or deeper fringing or any number of other things. But I find the profile corrections are usually pretty effective. And then the last thing that, this is something that I blame Ansel Adams for, but he said every image should have a vignette, but the viewer should never be aware that you've applied one. And I think that's a pretty good rule for most images. And so I often will add a little bit of a vignette. This image actually has a natural vignette from where the sun was. You can see that the edges are already darkened a bit. I didn't have to do that. And so, if I wanted to make it a little more dramatic, certainly don't want to go that far. But if I wanted to add a little bit of a dark vignette to the edges, I don't think that hurts the image. So as a first pass, I think that doesn't look too bad. If you go down here to the bottom, you can see where it says Y, two boxes that say Y. And basically, it tells you where you started and where you finished. It does include the crop. You don't see the original crop. But you can see there's a fairly different, these images look quite different now than they did when we started. Over here on the left side is the history. So this is every change that I just made to the image. So adjustments to highlights, exposure, converts, crops, all the stuff that we just did is all over here. If at any point I decide, I don't think I really want that, I don't want to adjust those highlights the way I did back there, I can go back and just sort of fly through time and get back to whatever the image looked like there and start processing it again. So everything that happens in Lightroom is lossless. You never change the original image. It merely changes what the data is that you've applied to it. And so at any time, I can go back to images I created a decade ago and still see all of this history, and I can convert it back to what I originally took it at, or I can do it in a new and entirely different way if I feel like it. So all I had to do is click back up here, and we're back where we were when we finished. All right, so that's our first image I wanted to go through. We are quickly running out of time here, so let's do a quick wildlife shot. Let's do the Cooper's hawk that I just photographed yesterday. Incidentally, so there's another little arrow at the bottom here. Everything those 6 images that I flagged earlier in that little quick collection are all right here. So I can navigate back and forth between those quite quickly. All right. So this is an image of a portrait of a Cooper's hawk. I actually shot this through a glass window, and so I know it's going to have some sharpness, maybe some other issues associated with it. But as I look at this, it's a basic portrait. There's not a lot to it. It's just a shot of a Cooper's hawk. But what I can do, so when I come at an image like this, I'll kind of think, okay, what do I want to do? And I look at this, what are the problems with the image? Well, its face is a little dark. The image overall, frankly, especially looking at the histogram, is a little dark. So I'm probably going to want to brighten things up. I am going to want to make sure I've got as much detail in the feathers and sharpness in the feathers as I can get. I think there's too much headroom, so maybe a slight crop, something to nick off the top of that would be. There's a lot of negative space on the left side of the image. That's not bad, but I don't want to draw attention to it either. So maybe we can do something over here that will help us, bring our attention back to the bird and away from this pale colored negative space. I'm probably going to want to brighten up the eye a little bit. In fact, I think that was a question I had from one of you guys before this, was to talk about eyes and wildlife. And so those are all issues that I know I'm going to want to address in this image. So let's just start at the top. We already talked about knowing that I need to crop it, or I'm going to want to crop it. So I'm going to open up the crop tool, and you can see this is locked again. So I don't want to keep I want to change the aspect ratio. So I'm going to unlock it, and I'm just going to maybe nick off a little bit there at the top, and maybe I'll bring in that side. No, I kind of like that a little bit more like that. Double click will accept that crop. Then that brings us down into this basic module. And before I move back up to this area, I'm going to go through my general post-processing. So I mentioned it was a little, let's first of all look at the color temperature. I have a feeling I probably want to just a touch. I'm adjusting up and down there. You can see the color temperature change. Honestly, I think what the camera did was probably pretty good. Exposure, it's a little darker, particularly in the bird itself. So I'm going to increase the exposure 0.6 stops. And keep in mind that I can adjust these again at any time, and I probably will, but as a first pass, this is what I'm doing. Highlights, this bright area in the middle of the frame, I think is just too bright. So we're going to see if I can pull that down a little bit, remove a little bit of that brightness there. Shadows, the darkest part of the image are here in the wing and around the bird's face. I'm definitely going to want to bring up the shadows a little bit to bring in some detail. So I'm going to slowly bring that slider all the way up. And you can see that quite a change comes in. At 100, you often start to generate a little bit of noise, so I'm not going to take it up that high. I think I'll go to about there. Whites are the very brightest parts of the frame. You can see when I take that slider around. If you take too much whites out, it makes the image look really gray. And so I tend not to play with the white slider too much. Blacks, I can darken the very darkest points. I can brighten them a little bit. I also find that tends to gray things out or create too much contrast. In this image, I don't think I'm going to use the blacks at all. Texture, as I mentioned with fur earlier, is also effective with feathers. Let's put that to 1:1. And I am going to add a little texture and just watch what happens with the feathers. See how that starts to sharpen up? You can really start to see the detail. So I'm going to slide it from 0 and take that slowly up. And you can see that detail really start to come in. If you go too strong, it can be a little too much. But I find it quite effective at bringing in some of that detail. Clarity, again, increases the contrast between dark areas and light areas. There's a lot of those. Look at the bird's face. Zoom in again. I want to increase the clarity. And you can see how that stuff really starts to come in. And it starts to be too much after a little while. But a bit of clarity here probably will help us. Dehaze, that hammer we talked about, it's pretty rare that I apply very much. You can see here it quickly starts to look pretty weird. I don't think I'll apply any haze any dehaze to this image. Vibrance, again, increases the saturation of those mid-saturation tones. Not a lot of color in this image to begin with, and so I don't think I need to do very much there. All right, so not bad as a first little pass, but what else can I do? So one thing I know for sure is this yellow eye is pretty cool. I really would like to emphasize that. And so what I'm going to do is go up and click on the brush tool. So that's that furthest right tool in our little toolbar up here. I'm going to click on that. And by scrolling on my mouse, I can make that bigger or smaller. And I'm going to make it, a little bit smaller, a fair amount smaller than the eye itself. So you can see there's 2 concentric circles as part of that. One is the graduated area on the outside of the brush, and the center part fully incorporates the brush. And I'm going to go in here to the eye, and I'm going to just brush that in. That's too bright. It was set at the exposure at 1.46. That was too much. Suddenly, if you hover over the dot, you can see it turn red. That's where we just edited. You can easily step back and get rid of that if you want to over here on the left. And I'm just going to pull that back. I think maybe I want more like a stop of extra light, not like stop and a half. A bit brighter. I can also, selectively increase the saturation there. I mean, that's a nice yellow eye. I probably want to emphasize that as much as I can. I can even selectively adjust the white balance in that part of the frame by adjusting the temperature. And so if I want to make it even yellower, I can do that, although it starts to turn kind of orange and weird looking. But maybe I do want it a little bit more yellow than the rest of the frame. So increasing saturation, clarity, sharpness, and you can even selectively remove noise, although it's not the most effective way to do that. So that's the brush tool. Very effective little tool for spot adjusting or dodging and burning elements of your image. Now, earlier I mentioned this big empty space here on the left. It's a little too, there's too much there. It's not, the space-wise, I think it's fine compositionally, but it's a little too bright, and I want to focus our attention on this bird. And so I could add a vignette, which I probably will do, but I'm going to grab this graduated filter, and I am going to drag it. You can see how that gets bigger across this part of the frame, giving it a nice wide edge. I don't want a tight edge. And then rather than having it make that part of the frame brighter, I'm going to make it just a little bit darker. So just a third of a stop was enough to sort of darken this side of the frame. All right, going back down here to sharpening. It's fairly sharp considering I shot it through a glass window of the house. It actually looks pretty good. I don't think I'm going to sharpen too much. Actually, not at all. I think it's plenty sharp for my uses. So I'm not going to touch that. There is a touch of noise. You can see here, particularly in the darker areas, there's a bit of noise. So I'm going to give a little bit of noise reduction, maybe 25 to 30. And there, I took care of just about all the noise without reducing my sharpness very much. That's one of the problems with noise reduction is it does make things look unsharp. We'll apply the lens corrections. And the last thing we're going to do is add that touch of finger, just to edge those corners a little bit and bring our focus back to the main subject of the bird. And here we have our before and afters. Pretty darn different, isn't it? We've made a nice improvement on that particular image. So I think that looks pretty good. And we can go back here. I realized that our hour is up. So I wanted to take a minute to answer questions. If anybody does want to stick around for a little bit longer, I am happy to take a few more questions. So let me scroll through the questions that you guys have sent me here and see if there's anything else. Longest I'd spend editing an image, Jennifer. I kind of go back, return to images again and again. So some images is hours. If I'm really trying to work at dodging and burning and trying to do things really effectively, I might spend a long time on one particular image. But honestly, I would say most images are kind of what we just did there. And that was one of the, that's just a quick breeze through. If I'm just sharing to Instagram or Facebook or something, kind of what we just did would be a first pass processing. And a lot of my images never see more than that. So that's kind of the rough idea. But you can spend as much time as you want. I find there's a risk of what I call post-processing creep, where you go in and it's like, oh, I can use a little more saturation on that. And then you go back to it a week later and boy, a little bit more saturation sure would look good in that image. Then you go back to it another week later and say, oh, I think a touch more saturation would be just right. And then you end up with this crazy, outrageous color wild image that just doesn't look right. Although to you, because you saw it gradually, it doesn't. It can really be a bit messy to somebody else, but to you it might look okay. So you got to be really careful with processing again and again. But I do touch up, and often I'll go back to an image when I've learned a new technique or Lightroom's come out with a new tool. I will go back to an old image, erase all the changes that I made previously, and start again. or you can create duplicate files. Again, we're not going to talk about that today, but you can create a virtual copy, so you can edit the same image differently than you did first round. And that's a really useful little tool too. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Importing libraries, Becky, that's a tougher one. I would have to, honestly, I'd have to go look that up and how to make that happen. It's pretty easy. I have done it. I think it's just a function in one of the headings up there, probably in the library. I suspect there is an import library functionality. If you email me, I'll try to look it up or point you to a resource that would allow you to do that. Does Photoshop take Lightroom imports? Good question. Yes, that was something I meant to bring up. Let's go back here quickly to Lightroom. We will go back to the library. So if I wanted to take this image that we just created, or that we just manipulated right here of the Cooper's Hawk, I can right-click on a PC or control-click on a Mac, and there is an option for Edit In. See right here, Edit In, and Adobe Photoshop 2020 is my current version of Photoshop. If I were to click on that, it will launch this image in Photoshop. And so you can very quickly move back and forth. And then within Photoshop, you can also save it back into Lightroom. But keep in mind, it will be a different file when it comes back in. It will come in as like a PSD or a TIFF or a JPEG or however you saved it. It will not stay as a DNG. You'll keep your original, but it will create a new file for the one that you've edited in Photoshop. So hopefully that answered that question. Okay, let's see what else we got here. What percentage can you safely crop of an image quality? Really depends on the amount of megapixels you're drawing from. I shoot a lot with Micro Four Thirds, Lumix and Olympus cameras. They have a very small sensor to begin with, so I can't crop very much in mine. Most of the cropping has already happened inside the camera with the small sensor. If you're shooting, my nighttime camera is a Sony A7R 3 or 4 or whatever it is, and it's got 48 megapixels or something. So I can chop that thing down to a tiny little file image and get a lot of detail out of it. So it really depends on the camera you're using. It depends on how high an ISO. It depends on a lot more than that. And if you're just sharing to Instagram, you could crop the heck out of something if you're just sharing to social media, because it doesn't, people are looking at it on their phones. So it only needs to be this big. So if you're just using it for social media, crop away. What are the considerations in switching to Photoshop? Not a lot of considerations except what I mentioned there, Joe. It's the once it goes into Photoshop, the file that you're creating there think of it as a standalone file. You're not going to change what's in your Lightroom catalog. You're creating something new. And so what you do in Photoshop is entirely separate from what you've done in Lightroom. When you export it out of Lightroom, it will take all the changes you've already applied, so you don't have to do them again in Photoshop. But once you're in Photoshop, it's a standalone image. So any change you make there will be stuck with the image. So let's see. If I've moved images to my computer, will they still change to DNG in Lightroom? So Richard, are you asking about whether will they still change to DNG in Lightroom? So you might have to clarify that question. So you're talking about if you're moving your files around from where they're stored? Because if you move a file from where it's originally stored, so if I switch hard drives, like if I'm updating my hard drives, and this hard drive of mine is called Dave's Images 1. It's actually the 5th hard drive I've named Dave's Images 1, because this is the drive, my default drive, and I want to make sure that Lightroom is pointing to it all the time. And so every new hard drive I get when I update this drive, I copy all of it, my images exactly as they are, into that new hard drive, and I call that new hard drive Dave's Images 1, just so Lightroom knows where to work. Otherwise, you have to repoint it and refine the images each time you do it. It gets a little convoluted. Joe, why change to Photoshop? Photoshop has some capabilities that Lightroom does not. The cloning, the tools and masking tools and layer tools, in Photoshop are really helpful for some images. But there are just some things that Photoshop can do that Lightroom can't. I probably do 90% of my editing in Lightroom, but there are a few things that Lightroom's not very good at that I export to Photoshop for. Let's see. When exporting from Lightroom under file settings, which setting do you recommend in color space? So color space, you'll hear everybody talk. I use Adobe RGB just because I use Adobe programs. So color space, a lot of the publishers that I work with and magazine printers use sRGB. So it depends. If I don't have if somebody hasn't requested anything in particular, then I use Adobe RGB. If if it's going to a magazine, it's usually sRGB. But that, color space, you'll hear lots of argument that it really doesn't make any difference. They're both can see more colors than our eyes can see, and they'll look about the same. From camera to computer as opposed to just in Lightroom. So if you just want to drag it from your, So Richard, if you're taking it, you can import files into Lightroom directly from a hard drive rather than from a card, and you can do the same thing. And you can just, rather than having Lightroom move or put the images in a specific location, you can just have it point to wherever you put it. I can walk you through that separately at some point. It's another step. All right, I am going to unmute everybody, so watch the thing. If you have more questions, then feel free to shout them out. And let's do this again sometime, and we can talk about it. And if you feel the need to log out, Joe, I see you're taking off. Thanks, man. We'll talk to you later. And feel free if anybody else needs to log out. I will not be offended. We've been here an hour. So thanks so much for your attention. Looks like we held on to just about everybody who logged in.
Thank you. I appreciate your time and all the information. I will be emailing you. I have quite a few more questions. I also work on a Mac and have for decades and have probably 60,000 to 80,000 images that I'm going to want to move to the Lightroom. So I have a lot more questions, so I will be emailing.
Yes, please, and feel free to do so. I am certainly happy to answer questions over email, or we'll do this again. So and maybe next time we get into the meat of the program a little bit more as well after the overview.
When are you coming back to Alaska?
I should be back in Alaska. Well, I don't know. The borders are closed right now, and so and they closed it through May 19th right now. We may try to apply for special exemptions to get home. I know they make a few exceptions, so we may try to do that. Otherwise, it's not the worst thing in the world to be here, but it's I'm looking forward to getting home.
I'll be heading to Homer in May, so I thought I would give a shout out if you were down there. But
good.
Sounds like you'll still be outside.
Well, I'll be down in Homer at some point this summer for a while, I'm sure. So maybe we can cross paths.
Oh, I would love that. Okay.
Good. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
All right. You're welcome, folks. Anybody have more specific questions? I see a lot of people logging out and saying thanks. So anybody else have questions? I'm happy to take some time.
Yeah, Dave, I just quick one on your external hard drives there. How many do you use for backup, safely for a backup to a backup, and have you ever had any fail?
I haven't, fingers crossed, I have never had a hard drive failure, but I definitely know a lot of people who have. So at minimum, I keep everything as duplicates. I actually think I have everything as triplicate now. So whenever I'm traveling, like if I'm traveling abroad, like to Africa or something, I keep everything on the SD card in the camera, and then I also copy everything over to an external hard drive. And so I have everything in duplicate in the field, at least in two places, the SD card and the external hard drive. And then at home, I keep one copy of the hard drive that I use for working. So that's the one that I'm constantly using on my computer. And then I keep one in a separate location that's a duplicate of that. And I try to keep them up to date every few weeks or so, or every time I've done a major shoot that I want to make sure is safe. And then I have a third copy that I use in the house that is also my backup disk for my computer. And so generally things are in triplicate. But I don't really have the best methodology for preserving my images. I feel pretty secure with what I'm doing, but I'm sure there's an easier way. Yeah, I see Fred Rosenberg here saying as an IT nerd that I've had enough failures to keep triples of everything. You definitely can't be too careful there. Good advice, Fred. Exporting pictures to hard drive versus catalogs. Yeah, exporting, I think we'll save that for a future talk. So Eleanor, why don't you try to drop in on whatever next talk we do, and we'll talk about exporting for print or whatever, because there's a number of things to consider there, and it's kind of hard to talk about in just a minute or so. So I'll put that on my list of things to cover in the next time we do this. Anybody else? All right. Well, thanks so much, guys, for joining me. I am glad I managed to hold most of your attention for that period of time. So yeah, feel free to email me questions. Let's see here. I was going to bring up just a quick little thing. Where the places where you can find me. So there's my email address. Feel free to email me. My main website and Facebook you can find me on. And then I do have a new Facebook group. I think most of you guys are probably members of that. But it's called DWS Photo Support. We've got close to 100 people on there now, and it seems like a friendly group and some quite good photographers who are happy to share, share and talk and share images and give critiques and all that sort of stuff. So feel free to join me there. And take care, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.